Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I'm your host, Robert Stanley. Texas just passed some crazy anti-abortion and pro-gun bills, and my friends Seth, Aron, and Brian are going to break it down for us.
Let's do it.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
Tonight, outrage in Texas.
It's going to be nearly impossible for folks to access the care that they need.
Protest over what is now the most restrictive abortion law in the country, going into effect after the U.S. Supreme Court did not act on opponents' request to block it.
Bill that I'm about to sign that ensures that the life of every unborn child who has a heartbeat will be saved from the ravages of abortion.
Hi, this is Brian Dalton from the Mr. Deity channel on YouTube. You can find me at patreon.com/Mr. Deity, MRDEITY.
Hi, I'm Aron Ra. You can find me on patreon.com/ARONRA.
I'm Seth Andrews. I'm host of the Thinking Atheist podcast. The website is thethinkingatheist.com.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
Starting today, Texas 21 and older can carry handguns without training or a license, as long as they're not legally prohibited from doing so. Another law, beer and wine can be sold starting at 10 in the morning on Sundays. And starting today, a new law requires law enforcement officers keep their body cameras on during an active investigation. And in one of the most controversial bills, abortions are banned once a fetal heartbeat is detected, which is about 6 weeks into a pregnancy. However, the U.S. Supreme Court has yet to act on an emergency appeal to put the law on hold. And another law, the government is now unable to force churches and places of worship from closing its doors.
Aron, Seth, Brian, I'm so happy to be talking to you guys. So you heard that news report. That's insane. Texas is going absolutely crazy. Seth, I think you're out there in Oklahoma, so you're not too far from the crazy, but to Brian and California, we must seem like we're off our rockers completely.
Well, more beer and more guns together. What could go wrong?
Well, add to that the cops no longer have to have their cameras on, so they want as much injustice as we can get.
I thought it said that they had to.
Well, they have to when there's an investigation of some kind, when that's taking place. But as I understand it, they are not required beyond that. And correct me if I'm wrong.
What I heard was that they didn't have to have their cameras on unless there's an investigation. Wow. So, and the reason they do this is because a Dallas cop went into the wrong apartment, thought it was her apartment, shot and killed the guy who was in there, who she knew, by the way.
No way. I didn't know she knew him.
Someone else's apartment, didn't recognize that she's in someone else's apartment, and killed the guy that she knew.
Now, I'm interested in the firearms aspect of this. I think Aron and I may have this in common, and I find myself trying to explain it a little bit. I am a licensed firearms owner. I've got a couple of pistols I keep in the house. I never take them out. I certainly don't put them on my person or in my car or what have you. I don't wear it to Starbucks. I almost completely use it for target shooting, for recreation. I have made the statement that if somebody was to break into my home and I felt that we were in mortal peril, I would be prepared. I would be myself. I would take the responsibility of lethal force against what I considered to be lethal danger. And that's a whole other conversation. So I've tried to humanize the gun argument just a little bit, but it's extremely difficult because there are so many people out there that just, it's Dodge City. I'm saying it's just the wild. When Oklahoma a few years ago passed the bill that they had an unrestricted firearms bill of some kind, open carry, where you can actually, you don't have to have it concealed. You can actually sort of wear it like Old West style. Right. Some dude put on a 2-gun rig and walked down, and he was just waltzing around downtown near City Hall in the courthouse, looking like Wyatt Earp's crazy uncle, not realizing that, okay, well, there are a few restrictions. You do have to have a license. But I mean, this is how this part of the country approaches the whole thing with guns. They've attached guns not just to their notions of freedom in the United States, but really to personal identity. And I find that terrifying. And I know, Aron, don't you shoot, buddy? Don't you go out and target shoot, etc.?
I bought an old cowboy 6-shooter because if we're going to be, back in Texas with everybody got a gun, then it should be an old cowboy 6-shooter.
I just see you pull up on the motorcycle and you hear the whistle in the background. Literally as he gets ready to bear down on the bad guy. Yeah. But I mean, California doesn't have any kind of even concealed carry. Is that right? Aren't you guys pretty strict?
I think, yeah. I mean, if I understand it correctly, it is a bit like county by county. I think some of the counties in Central California have more liberal standards, maybe. But it's hard. It's hard to get a concealed carry license. I mean, there's a lot of rigmarole. But
I try to tell people that I know a ton of people who are responsible, law-abiding, licensed, fully trained firearms owners who would be terrified, mortified at the idea of using a weapon against their fellow human beings. Their guns are not linked to their identity. They own and shoot for a number of reasons. So I've tried to humanize it.
Yeah,
all you got to do is
I can't imagine being in such a desperate situation that I would actually shoot somebody.
Oh, I can.
You come in my house, I'm firing.
I don't look forward to that day. Maybe if someone literally if I felt the lethal threat, someone crashes into my house at 3 a.m. and it's game on. But the difference is that I know some people who would be like, well, hell yeah, shoot him twice, drag his body. If he's outside, drag his body inside is what they used to say, because it's legal if you shoot him when he breaks. Right. Of course, that's a CSI nightmare because you'd get busted. But there's a sense of identity, of pride in saying, hell, you break into my house and I'll shoot you and shoot you again. And you had it coming, and then I'll go brag to my bar buddies that I'll do it. And I think there are a lot of people who are like me who thought, dear God, if anything ever like that ever took place, it would be a life-altering, devastating thing. And, when you're speaking to these life and death issues, I think we tend to we see it marginalized and minimized to an alarming extent out there. But, I don't know. Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, et cetera, the linking of guns to freedom. I mean, I don't know. Aron, you've got to see a shit ton of people. Oh, can I swear on this show?
Oh, yeah. You fucking swear.
You got to see a bunch of people that are driving around with, the flag that's bearing the AR-15 on it, as they have Lee Greenwood, proud to be an American, blasting through the windows, right?
We get a lot of the double flags where there's, one Texas flag and one Dixie flag.
Wow.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that. And what I also see is people carrying their ARs and their AKs into Walmart, because you gotta be armed in Walmart.
Yeah.
So I'll talk to cops. I'm a fellow gun owner myself. Like you said, Seth, not the kind of weirdo one at Starbucks, but I keep it at a safe place in my home for house protection. But I've spoken to many police officers, and it surprises me. They all tell me the same thing. I have yet to have a cop tell me something different, and I've asked this question at least a dozen times just over the last, since I've been in Texas, since 2001, actually. And they always are pro gun rights. They say maybe if a citizen has a gun on them, they can, quote unquote, help us out. And that, it's shocking to me. I mean, if it's coming from them and they're doing the job, there must be something to it. But it just seems like a dangerous statement for a police officer to make. And this whole situation of now you don't have to have any kind of a permit. Everybody can have a gun. That just adds to the danger, especially for the cops, because now when they come up, knock on that window, that tinted window slips down just a little bit. They're probably thinking that guy's most likely to have a gun, which would make them even more likely to be on the defense and maybe have their gun out or maybe shoot if they see you reaching for your wallet. It just seems like
if you're black, then you're automatically assumed to have a gun anyway.
Sure.
I'm still waiting for that. We have to arm all black people movement. That's the one I'm waiting for.
Yeah, that happened in California already, believe it or not. That was in
Did it?
1967. Yeah, the Black Panthers were protesting outside with their AR-15s when Ronnie Reagan banned assault weapons in California.
I'm saying I would like to see that movement within the NRA itself. This push for all black people to be armed.
Yeah, well, when black people showed up with AR-15s, then the government decided to make them illegal.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'm interested. There have been a lot of people who are these sort of alarmist, wackadoodle evangelicals who've been preaching sermons warning about COVID in relation to the end times. And there was one, forgive me, I can't remember his name. I'm sure it's Googleable. But he was warning that, hey, these door-to-door COVID vaccine efforts that they're talking about, hey, if you can't get to where the vaccine is, we'd like to create a healthcare option that brings the vaccine to your door. It couldn't be any more convenient for you. It's our way of trying to promote health and safety as a state and as a nation. And the preacher was saying, this is a Trojan horse. Essentially what they want to do, they're coming in the guise of public safety, but what they really want to do is jump into your house and take your guns. And what I worry about is that type of alarmist preaching, totally false, totally unsubstantiated, and extremely dangerous. What happens when somebody who's in their house, they got that arsenal of weapons waiting for this apocalyptic assault on their freedoms, and a healthcare worker shows up, knocks on the door, and that person, for any subjective reason, feels threatened? Somebody's going to get hurt or killed. And in the next, couple of years, that's one of the aspects of this sort of COVID disinformation campaign that I'll be watching extremely closely. I really worry that those fringe elements are going to become so freaked out, believing that COVID is a conspiracy to rob them of their Americanness, that they will declare a literal war, a literal jihad against those they consider to be enemies of God.
I think it was Marjorie Taylor Greene that suggested something just like that with a Second Amendment remedy to people who are coming to your door to give you the vaccine.
As long as you let people have the Second Amendment, then they feel safe. And they don't even realize how the First Amendment, every provision thereof, is under attack because they have their guns, and so they feel safe.
Yeah.
It was Lauren Boebert at CPAC that said the most. It blows my mind how like infantile their speaking and vocabulary is becoming on the right post-Trump. Where she said same thing you guys were just talking about. They're going to come to your door. Don't come to our door with your Fauci ouchie. I mean, it's so cringy. The world we're living in.
We knew that people like her and Green, et cetera, existed. I think what surprised me, and perhaps it shouldn't have, was that there were enough people who would vote to elect. We always knew there was some really stupid and dangerous people in the world. But when I look at the election of these people into representative government and the halls of power influencing the laws that are passed in this country, I genuinely do fear for the species. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, the more we're sounding the alarms and saying, hey, this is, here's what the data says, and here's what humanism stands for, and here's why theocracies are bad. The more we do that, the more freaky and wacky and dangerous the opposite side becomes. I don't know what the solution is.
Even more troubling to me than the guns is the abortion bill. Because, I mean, the guns, obviously, we got some problems coming because you're going to have some guy like me. I don't walk around with a gun, but if I did and I'm in a gas station or what have you, and I perceive a threat, I would pull the gun out. I'm going home one way or the other. But how many people are like that, where they're just a little paranoid and they shouldn't be walking around with that gun? That's terrifying. But the abortion bill, I don't know. To me, I'm thinking that one's worse because it's not just you're making us more, or you're making us less safe. This one is you're actually taking away our civil rights.
Yeah, they're taking away constitutional rights, and the underhanded way that they did it, I think, is going to force a precedent because other people, other states or whatever, can just take away other rights just the same way, using the same method. And the fact that the Supreme Court, people on the Supreme Court knew that, but still, that the majority allowed this is quite bothersome for me. I mean, this is what happens when you let a madman stack the courts.
Yeah. And it's not just a madman stacking the courts. It's the fact that we have this system with the Electoral College where someone who doesn't win the popular vote can get elected and then put people on the Supreme Court. Because if I'm doing the math right, and you take away Bush and you take away Trump, I believe. Am I doing the math right? Would it be an 8-1 court at this point?
Wow.
If you take away all of the judges appointed by someone who didn't win the popular vote, I think it would be 8-1.
I think the United States is also making a huge mistake in not prosecuting people, and just because they're corrupt people in government, they committed crimes in government, and then we just let them go. Like you mentioned, Bush, he's painting pictures at his ranch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
He should have been prosecuted
for war crimes.
Meanwhile,
and so should Trump be.
Interesting to watch the Supreme Court protect that Texas abortion ban, with Roberts actually siding with the liberals. And I thought to myself, and CNN actually had a piece about this. I mean, when the court has lost John Roberts on the abortion question, we know that the Supreme Court is no longer an adjudicating body. It is literally a political action committee. It is an activist right-wing group that wields terrible power over what is and isn't allowed in this country. And since we're seeing the decline of the evangelicals statistically, and if you look at all the metrics of the nuns, non-religious people, those who say religion holds no meaningful part of their lives, even if they're not an atheist, they just don't care. Maybe they're deist, maybe they're a spiritualist, whatever, but they're not a theocrat. Hell, there are some people who are devout Christians who are against the bleeding of the church into the state. They have an organization called Christians Against Christian Nationalism, with people like mega pastor Tony Campolo, etc. But, you see the hardcore evangelicals watching their statistical minority, their obsolescence, their irrelevance in the decades ahead. And they're in full white-knuckle panic mode. So what do? Well, you weaponize the courts. And you try to change the culture. If you can't do it from the popular vote and you can't do it from the electoral vote, you go through and you actually stack the courts in a way that buys you at least decades of time. I find that terrifying. Aron, didn't a bunch of people mobilize to try to jam the reporting website for the abortion?
Yes.
There was a bunch of Reddit people and that sort, the internet, professional trolls of the internet, that were logging, if I remember correctly, like fake reports just to inundate the system.
I don't know what came of that. I was just curious.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Nothing comes of anything anymore. So the governor here in Texas, who enacted all of this crap, right? He receives thousands and thousands of donations or dollars of donations from specific people. And then he appoints those specific people who made those donations to cushy jobs, like at ERCOT. So when our power went out in the winter, as everybody remembers, and people died as a result, what happened? What was done?
Nothing. Yeah, nothing happened.
I suspect nothing. Yeah.
Exactly. So what happened was a couple of people resigned so that they wouldn't be prosecuted. The people who were there still didn't get prosecuted. The people who resigned didn't get prosecuted. And instead, you pay thousands of dollars of donations, we'll give you a cushy job.
And then right after,
state then pays you back for the donation you paid me.
Yeah.
Right.
And then right after
There's
that,
also,
it was in the sorry, Brian, but when the summer came along, they urged everybody in Texas to don't use too much energy because we might lose our power grid again. So they didn't do anything because 6 months later, here we go again. And according to the Farmer's Almanac, this winter is supposed to be just another cold one like last one. So it's going to be here we go again.
Wow.
California, there has to be some accountability.
I was going to say, on top of it, you've got the irony of the fact that they're so obsessed in Texas with protecting the lives of the unborn, but the children in schools can't be protected by a mask mandate.
That's the beautiful thing about pro-life people. Once you're alive or once you're born, you're fucked.
They don't give.
They take away all of the welfare programs, all of the women and infant children programs, that all of the things that would help, like teen mothers or young parents, whatever. They take all of that away. They take the education away, where they don't want to have. Texas famously did not have sex education for a long time. They were teaching abstinence only, which, of course, look how fabulously that works. That's why Texas led the nation for a decade in repeat teen pregnancies. And then once the kids are born, because you don't allow contraception and you don't allow sex education, then the kid is born and you don't allow any welfare programs. So you have these people in a positive feedback loop where they just keep getting poorer and poorer after every generation. Where already we started with a quarter of our kids were below the poverty level, and it just divides the haves from the have-nots. And you have the rich and you have the poor, and then we end up with Texas leading the way into a third world country.
If I may, I want to quote a guy named Dave Barnhart. I believe he is a pastor, but he actually came out on the right side of this. It'll take me just a minute and a half to read it, but he said, "The unborn are a convenient group of people to advocate for. They never make demands of you. They're morally uncomplicated, unlike the incarcerated, addicted, or chronically poor. They don't resent your condescension or complain that you're not politically correct. Unlike widows, they don't ask you to question patriarchy. Unlike orphans, they don't need money, education, or childcare. Unlike aliens, they don't bring all that racial, cultural, and religious baggage that you dislike. They allow you to feel good about yourself without any work at creating or maintaining relationships. When they're born, you can forget about them because they cease to be unborn. It's almost as if by being born, they have died to you. You can love the unborn and advocate for them without substantially challenging your own wealth, power, or privilege, without reimagining social structures, apologizing, or making reparations to anyone. They are, in short, the perfect people to love if you want to claim you love Jesus, but actually dislike people who breathe. Prisoners, immigrants, the sick, the poor, widows, orphans, all the groups that are specifically mentioned in the Bible, they all get thrown under the bus for the unborn." That's from Dave Barnhart on Twitter. It was posted actually a couple of years ago, but I thought it was really relevant right now.
Wow.
That is
well written. Was. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just for a second there, I forgot that I'm recording a podcast. I thought I was listening to the Thinking Atheist. Like, I just your voice, man. I know you hear that all the time.
I just do a free audiobook every time I open my mouth. Sorry about that.
I was just listening to the Thinking Atheist
the
show for a
host
minute.
In me just kicked in. Sorry.
No, that was great. Very, very appropriate read.
He never turns off that professional narrative voice.
He does it at Thanksgiving dinner, and all the family rolls their eyes.
Look, man, I read Dr. Josh Bowen's book, the Atheist Handbook to the Old Testament, right? We did like an 11 hours, 45-minute audiobook for the guy. And I'm curious, always curious to see how it goes over, especially since the subject matter is so thick. So I went and I was looking at the reviews, like, please let them love me, because I'm that insecure, I'm sure. And somebody was like, oh my, Seth Andrews, God, he sounds like a computer. He sounds like a computer voice. What, couldn't they find a real narrator? And they just destroyed me, And I was just like, oh God, Natalie, they hate me. I just went and sat in the corner for an hour and rocked back and forth. It was so sad.
Seth, you have the butter voice. So to hear that 1 in 1,000 person who's going to complain about you.
Oh, I'm not worried about it. I just thought it was awesome. I thought, wow, I sound like a Commodore VIC 20. Okay, I'll take that, I guess. Yeah, that works.
When I did my audio book, somebody had me listen to Christopher Hitchens. Now, I've been in the room when he's doing his like debates and such, and so it's amazing just to be in the where it's not even a recording, where you're just listening to the man directly, and he was a powerful, impressive speaker. But in audio, in reading his audio book, he would trail. Like the hell because he's bored. He's just reading a book. So people were coaching me in how not to be Hitchens in audiobook.
Oh, that's funny.
Can you guys believe this December will be 10 years since we lost Hitch? 10 years.
Wow.
I'm preparing a 10-year, like a retrospective with audio clips for December. And I was like, God, it's been a decade. Time has really, really flown, and he remains greatly missed as far as I'm concerned. So,
yeah.
Yes, me too.
What are we going to do about my state?
Aren't you seceding from the union? I thought you guys were going to go and do your own thing.
We tried.
That's what happens when you talk about how immature everyone is. That's the thing that amazes me. How I thought we were all grown-ups here. Right. And the more I look around, the more I see that we're not. 40 and 50-year-old people who are just children on a playground. Have no realistic concepts about anything, have no logical capacity. They can only think with emotion and they can't analyze anything. They'll actually tell me, no, I don't want to believe that, so they don't. It doesn't matter if you prove that it's true. They don't want to believe it. And I'm lost.
I'm here in a state where we're recalling the governor because he had a fancy dinner, which was a stupid thing. Just I don't even understand how he thought that was okay or that he was going to get away with it. But we're literally having an entire election where you could vote in a new governor with, I don't know, maybe 10, 15% of the vote, because the way it's set up, it's basically whoever gets, if he's recalled, that's the one question. Are we recalling him? Yes or no? Hopefully it'll be no. But if it's yes, then from this list of 42 candidates, including a woman here who is famous for simply being on billboards with her incredibly large breasts. That's one of the candidates. Angela.
Well, that's how you got your previous governor, Schwarzenegger, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
That's why you have all those auto accidents.
She could theoretically be our governor with no majority of the population approving. I mean, it's just there's nuttiness everywhere.
Oh, the ratings for these press conferences have gone through the roof. Just one of those things. Well, Aron was talking about the frustration that we have with trying to get people to change their minds. And I've done several broadcasts recently about the psychology of belief. I've actually brought in psychologists because I was having no traction, right? Oh, I'll just show them the data and they will see the data and they will change their minds and we will all join hands and we will frolic off to Reasonville together and there will be confetti and music and light and, there will be Yanni music and it will be amazing. And it just never happened. And I began to think about me in my own life before I began to sort of crack my mind open to allow new ideas to come in. I would have rejected everything that didn't line up with my worldview. And we get into how when it comes to beliefs that are linked to your identity, you protect those. Actually, the same parts of your brain will fire up when you protect an idea that is joined to your identity. That same part of the brain fires up that would fire up in front of a physical threat. You feel threatened and the fight or flight kicks in. And we've seen both from people who are God defenders. Some people engage and become outraged and they start pounding on the podium, and other people just split and say, I'll pray for you. And they go and take off and they never talk to you again. And it's extremely frustrating. And it's not just true in terms of religion. It's true in terms of politics. It's true in terms of people who are distrustful of things like the pharmaceutical industry. Big pharma is already implanted in their mind, which is one of the reasons that they would rather take horse tranquilizer, or not tranquilizer. Well, they might actually.
They probably would.
But the dewormer, right? The equine dewormer, they trust that more than they would trust the world's greatest vaccine minds and the scientific community on every major first world continent on the planet. And I look at this and I begin to die a little bit inside. And I think, how in the world do we ever break through? And I don't know that I know the answer. I don't know that I have a magic bullet. And I found myself navigating real frustration. Like, does it matter? Should I bother? I don't know if you guys as activists, had you ever go through that? Like what? Like nothing works. Does that ever happen to you?
Unfortunately, more and more it happens to me. And so when people ask me, well, to be honest, and I'm sorry to do this, but when people ask me for like the hope, especially when we're talking about the environment, right? When I look at how idiotic man the wise has become, I think, well, I'm glad I'm old and I can afford the good drinks.
Yeah. I see my role more as less about changing minds and more about giving my people, because how many people are watching my shows who are coming because they're genuinely open to changing their mind. I think I think there are very few, and I think to the extent that does happen, it's people who are having experiences in their lives that are leading them to think about changing their point of view. That seems to happen every now and then, but my whole thing is about giving our people ammunition and some sense of community around various ideals, and just giving them the backup to say, well, here's someone making this ridiculous argument. This is a good way to approach it, or something like that. And then I do think that the approach with with comedy in terms of changing minds is a little. I don't know if it'd be interesting to do a study on it, because I feel like it's hard to reject an idea that you're laughing at, because laughing is such an involuntary response. It's just a response to something that has an element of truth to it that triggers your funny bone. And when you're laughing at something, it does seem to be, I think it plants a seed, if nothing else. It gets in there and just leaves a little something.
Well, I've often heard the phrase that it's funny because it's true. And that, I think, is the people that we find ourselves arguing most against. They can't bring humor. Have you noticed how humorless they tend to be?
Yes.
They can't bring humor because they can't bring anything that's true.
Right.
Oh,
right.
wow.
And that's Homer, by the way. It's funny because it's true.
My favorite Homer quote is, just because I don't care doesn't mean I don't understand.
There's got to be something with the humor in the sense of it's taboo. I mean, that's why dirty jokes are so funny, right? Because it's something that you're thinking, I'm not supposed to think that. And maybe there has to be a little bit of cognitive dissonance, just a little flash of that lightning in your brain for it to really make you have one of those big belly laughs. But yeah, I think you're right. It's a way to get an idea in there without the guard up, right? So that you drop that guard down and go, I'm ready to laugh. It's this just split second of vulnerability. And that's one of the things, not to kiss your ass, man, but just we're on the topic. That's one of the things I love about what you do, Brian, is you use that humor to get these thoughts in there. And it's not just rare on the far right, Aron. I find it's a little rare within the atheist community. I don't hear as much. I don't know about you guys. I'm just getting so depressing. We're like, what do we do? But I don't hear as much laughter as whenever I first joined atheism, which was, I just started listening to, the three of you, Dillahunty. I could name a million others, of course, but it just seemed
that's
like
a laugh and a half.
It just seems like the community has become so divided and divisive. Have you guys seen this over the last, I guess, decade now?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
I gave a speech a couple of days ago in Lubbock, and I was in a college. It was the first speech that I've given the first time I've traveled for a presentation at all in well over a year. I canceled a bunch of things, and this is the first time I'm doing, since all that happened. But it's still ongoing, where we thought this would be over by now. And so I give my speech with a mask on. And I realize it's a bit of a statement. I didn't actually have to. I was far enough away. I had a shield up. I could have taken the mask off, but the people that were hosting had masks on, so I had a mask on. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, it would be good to make this statement here. And some of the people that they're supposedly my fans, we never know when they're in the comments, because they're saying, well, I used to like everything Aron did, but now I see him with this mask. He's sold out. He believes in masks.
Oh, no.
He believes the virus is real. That.
Wow.
Well, some of it is, I think there are probably 150 gears in this machine. Some of it, I think, is that familiarity is starting to breed contempt. At first there was a novelty back in 2007 as we saw this resurgence of free thought, and people were, you saw the Horsemen had their books for sale, and you saw some YouTubers and whatnot starting. This was the beginning of really the rise of the podcast surge, and it was kind of fresh. And then after a while, it became familiar. I think we started to realize that people are people, and atheism is not a guarantee of rationalism. I think we were made aware of people who were not just bad people, but predatory people and even dangerous people who had embedded themselves in the movement. And so whenever they were rooted out, that became an opportunity for the naysayers to say, well, it's all tainted. The bad apples have spoiled the bunch. This sort of this hipster mentality is, as we continue to see the important work being done, there's a lot of people who like to throw stones from the cheap seats, and it just makes me sick to my stomach. We look around, we're not seeing the death of the atheist movement. We're seeing that it's working. We're saying, in fact, the normalization of atheism is partially because of the long and constant work of wonderful people and organizations who have been beating that drum and who've been spreading information and countering bad or disinformation. And but speaking to division, forgive the long answer, but I myself I produced a podcast called Twitter is Not Life. Because I realized I was treating people differently on Twitter than I would treat them if they were in my living room. I was more caustic. I was more dismissive. I was going for the cheap jab. I was trying to win. I've also seen online that there is a binary kind of othering of people. If you are wrong, then you are bad. If you are bad, then you are horrible. And if you are horrible, you are a Nazi.
Right.
Something along those lines, you know. And a part of me thinks, oh, it is possible in this world for good people to have a bad idea. And I resist this sort of online mob violence almost, you know, against people who have a bad idea. There are some people, I think, who do need to be called out and even shunned for being horrible or saying horrible things. They're causing damage. But there are other people, they're just people. And just because they're wrong about something does not make them Adolf Hitler. That is probably the one thing that has frustrated me the most as of late.
You know, I came up against that reality really hard when I started making some political videos here and there, and you realize that as in agreement we all are on the whole God thing. Yeah. Everything else is off the table. You know, there's no unity amongst atheists, which makes sense because it's only about this one question of do you believe that there are gods or not, and there's no necessary, you know, political ideology that grows out of that or any other kind of ideology. What I'm troubled about, and I've been troubled about it for a long time ago. I made a video a long time ago. It's got to be 7 or 8 years. There was an article that I saw. I'm finally breaking up with Richard Dawkins, and I made a whole video about it because the thought of that was so ridiculous. First of all, when did he become your boyfriend? But why the idea that you can't agree with somebody on, you know, 90% of stuff and except that you're in horrible disagreement. I have so many disagreements with Sam Harris about race in particular, but on the God things, on his views on spirituality, I find him very enlightening and a reliable ally. And, you know, the complexity of having to agree with somebody and then find their views on another subject horrible doesn't necessarily wipe out all their value on this other side. The idea that you can't, you know, that everyone has to be in agreement on everything. There is a totalitarian urge, I think, in every possible ideology that you can imagine, where it really does want everyone to be just, you know, kind of atomically in agreement on all things. And that to me is disturbing as well, particularly in a pluralistic society.
The way I put it was, I used to agree with everything you ever said, and then you said that one thing I disagree with, and now I have to campaign against everything you ever do.
Yes.
Aron, I'm sorry you become so religious about your politics. That's normally what I hear. You know, you're really good on religion, Seth, but I'm sorry you've become so religious about humanism. And I think that's part of the equation. My atheism only speaks to what I don't believe, but the fact that I have rejected the supernatural when I came out of the faith, I had to go look at all the issues again without my God glasses on, right? So how do I feel about right to die issues and the death penalty? And how do I feel about the legalization of drugs? And how do I feel about LGBT marriage and all the, you know, the role of healthcare and foreign policy? And I realized that all this stuff for so long had been filtered through my religion. So I had to reintroduce me to myself. Hi, I'm Seth. I love long walks on the beach and all this stuff. Well, by the way, how do I feel myself about all these things? And I think as a humanist, without the atheism background informing what you do, or without the religion background informing what you do, I think it can fuel a lean into humanist values. And I remain convinced that those are largely, it's all situational, but they lean a little more left. They lean more liberal, you know. And so I'm that guy. I just think reality does have a liberal bias, you know, and I've taken it in the teeth for that. I'm sorry you're so religious about your liberalism or whatever. And I'm like, all right, fine. You know, that's all I got. I'd like to think I was being honest about it. But anyway.
When people argue with us on the topic of religion, they at least try to bring something. They at least bring their magic book of fables, if nothing else. But on the politics side, which is, by the way, politics is far less rational than religion, I've discovered.
Wow.
When they argue against my politics, they don't name anything that I got wrong. They just say that I'm wrong. And they don't have a point to make as to where they're right or what the problem is.
That's interesting what you said, Seth, because I found myself in a very similar position because, I was a real right winger. When you're Mormon, you just are a right winger. I mean, we had a president of the church who was part of the John Birch Society, so we're looking at real right wing. And when I left religion, it actually took me longer to get over my conservatism and my libertarianism than it did to get out of my religion. But the irony that I found is that I found my liberalism through a bit of what had been inculcated within me in religion, in terms of like Jesus. If you look at his root message, aside from talking about hell and that kind of shit, which is awful, it was just take care of. Can we just take care of each other? There's one of my favorite lines of his is, if someone asks for your coat, give him your cloak also. There's just take care of people and don't ask if they deserve it or they're worthy of it. That's all bullshit. None of us are worthy of it. Just take care of people. And that to me became my overriding kind of underlying philosophy of what we should be doing societally, which was in my head at the time as I was moving over, was just more moving back to that nice guy Jesus. There's really, bad guy Jesus too. But if you take the good guy Jesus part, it's pretty okay. Do unto others, that kind of crap.
Yeah, it was that hypocrisy that challenged me when I first lost my faith as well, because everything to me was abortion. Which, if you think about it, if you take it as like the way that you hear them straw man it, that it's, you're killing babies. Well, that's pretty bad. I can't think of a bigger side to get on, right. or a taller mountain to die on it. Like you're baby killing? Is that what I'm having to stand up against? Of course, whatever you tell me, whatever laws you want to pass, whatever else you're for, you want this Supreme Court justice, you want guns, you want this or that, stay in Afghanistan and keep a 20-year war going, whatever you want. Let's just not kill babies. I'll vote for you. And once I lost my faith, then I started questioning other things. I started seeing that hypocrisy you're referring to. And then I looked into what is really happening in abortions. It's not like Trump described. So you remember he said the mom and dad, after the mom has the baby, they'll go in another room. No, that's what he said. They'll put the baby in a blanket. Then the doctor and the parents will go in another room and they'll talk about whether or not they want to keep it. That kind of propaganda worked on me,
When we're talking about things that are very difficult to believe, things you have to have a great deal of faith or gullibility or credulity to believe, let's talk about do we really believe that Trump never paid for an abortion?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I wrote
is there any chance?
You'd mentioned the Trump example. This was back from the State of the Union address when he said that New York cheered with delight upon the passage of legislation that would allow a baby to be ripped from the mother's womb moments before birth. And this was an egregious misrepresentation of a New York law. And that law allows abortions after 24 weeks if there is an absence of fetal viability or the abortions necessary to protect the patient's life or the life of the mother. Trump also was talking about the governor of Virginia, Ralph Northam, and said, quote, he would execute a baby after birth. Now, this is fear language, but he was referring to when Governor Northam was talking about non-viable fetuses with severe deformities who were being assessed and not resuscitated if the mother and the family desired it. So they're just a lie. And yet this type of fear language plays extremely well with the quote-unquote pro-life crowd who has this image in their minds. You see it on the posters and placards as they go out and protest. They see these fully functional babies who've been ripped from the womb, and those crazy murderous liberals just want to desecrate life before man and God. But it was all essentially a lie.
The example that I saw was that they were conjoined twins, and one of them was entirely parasitic and not like a separate entity entirely. So there's two heads involved here, as I understand it, and you could say that they're two different people, but it's severely malformed. One of them is supplying all of the sustenance to the other. And that was possible at that size as a newborn. But they said that within a matter of months, then the draw from the twin was going to be too much for either of them to survive. So they were going to have to separate and then in the process kill one of those twins, or they would both die. And so that was one of that was the specific example that I saw for when you can tell before the birth that this is going to be the case, then why not just abort the birth? And because birth process is dangerous and painful, and if it's unnecessary, why would you go through it?
Right. All that suffering, all that unnecessary suffering that's going to be happening. I was told by a longtime friend, a fellow podcaster, just recently. I was talking about how I got the vaccine, and he says, "Oh, well, you actually put aborted babies into your body." I said, "What does that even mean?" And he says, "You don't know? Like they use fetal tissue from aborted fetuses. They use those in the Pfizer vaccine. So everybody getting the vaccine, you're getting little bits of baby in you." And I just thought, if this is what we're up against, I don't know how to fix it. This is a fear of science and of medical science, of academia. What do you do?
Well, here's what I like to throw out in front of a devout anti-abortion believer. I revealed for them the scientific reality that about half, or actually a little more than half, of all fertilized eggs do not make it to term. And this is part of the quote-unquote intelligent design, meaning that if you believe the moment in the egg and the sperm all get together and a human soul is created, this is a baby, right off the bat. We have a soul, we have a life, we have a child. That means that more than half, sometimes upwards of 60 to 70% of those fertilized eggs are actually discharged through menstruation before coming to term, which would make Yahweh the most prolific abortion doctor in history. And I'll say that to the believer, and I have yet to receive a response other than their jaw dropping down to the carpet. That's all I've got. Beyond, well, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. It's his choice. It's his decision. But the truth is, why in the world would he allow the process to take place if that human soul was going to be discharged? More than that, who was it who said, you know what, if you are actually a divine soul and part of God's destiny, why did he bother with all the millions of other sperm? Somebody explain that to me.
My example is when I cite Numbers 5. And I have believers going through that go, okay, now why would you think that some guy living back then, he thinks his wife is pregnant? They state in the story, they know that the wife is pregnant. They know that she definitely had sex, and specifically with a man rather than a woman. How do they know that? What's the only clue that they could have? That she definitely had sex but was not witnessed or caught. Well, she's pregnant, and she shouldn't be. Mm-hmm. That's it. That's your example. And what is when you go to the priest and the priest forces the woman to drink this shit water that they make, and then they bless it so that or curse it rather, so that God becomes directly involved in the abortive process. It says that the thigh, and we know that the reference to the thigh, that it's not a woman's thigh, that Sanhedrin 80b says that the unborn fetus is considered one of the woman's thighs. And so it says that the fetus, in some translations of the Bible will say this, that the fetus will rot and fall away, and the woman will become barren. But when I talk to believers, and I point out that, well, here's the only reason that they would suspect that she was cheating, the only way that they could know that she had sex with a man is if she's pregnant, and it says that the fetus will rot and fall away. But the believer that I'm talking to cannot accept that is an abortion, and that's what the Bible is endorsing with God's direct involvement and support. They can't. They said no. They wouldn't let that happen to a pregnant woman. They wouldn't let a pregnant woman have a fetus that rots and falls away. Are you serious? But they can't. There's a cognitive dissonance thing going on there.
That's exactly what you just said earlier. Full circle at the beginning of the podcast, Aron, is the politics is harder to get rid of than the religion. I think Brian supported that point as well. Yeah. Where this is a political stance that the GOP started from the 70s to get the religious right involved, to get the Catholics, especially. This was never a religious stance. It's always been a political one. And there you have it. You show them in their own Bible, hey, here's an abortion. They stick to their guns because they don't want to abandon their politics.
Well, I think also, though, when I was a devout believer, I simply would blink away anything that contradicted what I felt was a religious truism, because it had to have been a lie of the devil. I was a rationalization machine, but I was still adhering to my devout religious belief. I had just shut down or never actually turned on the reasoning centers of my brain. I was more of an apologist. I was an excuse machine. So I think it's probably a 1-2 punch of a political value judgment and also a religious position.
You know, before we wrap up, last question. We had said multiple times kind of rhetorically, you know, what are we going to do here? But anybody have any recommendations? I know, Aron, you at one point were even running for state senator, and I respect what you did when you decided to back down because you thought the other candidate who was running as a Democrat would have a better chance. And I thought that was pragmatically a wise choice. But suggestions? Anyone?
Just on the political landscape in general, I think Democrats have to act a little bit more like Republicans in terms of being willing to use the power when they have it. That's one of the things I think Democrats are too timid about. And right now we can blame basically two people, Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, for not being willing to throw the filibuster under the bus. But I'm wondering if Joe Biden's going to be courageous enough to say the courts have been stacked and I'm going to unstack them. That would be a hope of mine. The left has to be I shouldn't say the left. The moderate left has to be a little less moderate, and be willing to. I mean, does anyone doubt for a second that if the Republicans had this situation right now, that they just wouldn't be blasting through? I mean, the hypocrisy of holding back Merrick Garland and then pushing through Amy Rona Barrett is what I call her, Amy Rona Barrett. If they're prepared to do that, why are we not prepared to dump the filibuster for voting rights or for, or for infrastructure or for getting the court? I would like to see a 19-person Supreme Court. That I read a proposal about that, about how we just need a lot more people. The fact that so much of our lives are governed by such a small number of people is kind of obscene. I mean, I could go for even more people, but
I could see 13. I was thinking 9, but my worry is if you want to talk about stacking the court, well, what happens when you say that when you've got 7 and you want 15 and now you've just stacked it again?
Right.
I think probably, if I'm not a legal expert, but certainly we're looking at a court where, what is it? We've got, how many practicing Catholics and a couple of adherents to Judaism and no secular people really on the court? I mean, tell me that's a representative court when you have.
That's the other. Yeah. That's the other thing too. We have to finally make this country a democracy, an actual democracy because it really never has been. If you really think about it, we have yet to finally get a true democracy. It took. I mean, it was just 100 years ago where we let half the population finally have a say with women's right to vote. But we have to get rid of all of this anti-democratic bullshit. I think. I mean, if you look at the polls, if you look at people's answers to some of the big questions, we would be able to get there if we didn't have so many anti-democratic roadblocks as institutionalized in our government, including, like I mentioned before, this stupid idea of the Electoral College. I mean, that right there, right now, if you just take that away and we have an 8-1 Supreme Court that's appointed by Democrats, you have something that's far more in line with what the American people want in general.
I can't imagine why they would want to hold on to the filibuster. I remember when I was a kid and I learned what a filibuster was, I'm like, this is how adults conduct politics?
Right.
Well, speaking to his question about what do we do, I know I've expressed a sense of exasperation, but I do have, like Aron and I'm sure Brian, I have seen the stories of people who are waking up. And many of them are where I was. they're starting to realize. And I think there may be some utility in watching the insanity of the evangelicals over the past 5, 6, 7 years. There are some believers who were in fact, John Pavlovich just wrote an article saying, you know what, the last 5 years of evangelicals has actually made a great case for atheism. It's driving people out of the church. COVID has got people, they have got their Sundays back. They got a great excuse not to have to drive to church on Sunday mornings, and they kind of enjoy it. So people are drifting out of the church, and the church is in panic mode. But beyond all of that, I think that we're not going to change the minds of people or change the culture with data, although data is important. We can't walk into a room with the facts and just say, here are the facts, and expect that people are going to change their minds. Because, again, when it comes to beliefs that are associated with identity, these are often an emotional thing. I'm not saying that we are manipulative and disingenuous in trying to manipulate them emotionally, but it's okay to engage the heart as we also engage the mind. It's okay to feel something about the things we think about. And the way we're going to change the culture and help to change and encourage people is, I think, through good storytelling. We've got a great story to tell, the story of science, the story of the rise of reason, the story of humanist values, the story of the liberation of other people from, like Brian, from Mormonism, and Aron from a cafeteria plan of all kind of wild religions, and me from Christianity. The stories themselves, I think, have tremendous power. And I really do believe that we need to embrace the power of stories. And in doing so, and allowing people to feel something about these stories, and not surrendering emotion to the church, which we so often have done, I think that's how we're going to continue to encourage other people to find their way to intellectual and emotional freedom.
Thank you to Seth, Aron, and Brian. Thank you to Dave Blair at DaveBlairMusic.com. Thank you to Feedspot.com for promoting the Right to Reason to the Top 10 Atheist podcast. Thank you to our patrons, Jason Parker, Freethinker215, Alan Marks, Phyllis Spawn, Bernard, Lambert, Rel, Enema Man, Larry Wilson, Brittany, Catherine, and Catherine Class, and our top supporter, Rob Montgomery. You can support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Cool Right to Reason gift opportunity. Be the 10th person, has to be the number 10, to email me through therighttoreason.com and tell me the movie soundtrack for today's episode. No Shazamming! That's cheating. And you will receive a free Right to Reason coffee mug. All you have to do is guess the soundtrack and go to therighttoreason.com, click the tab Contact, and send me your answer. I'll respond asking for an appropriate address, and then you'll get a Right to Reason coffee mug. Last recipient is our own R2R patron, Enema Man, for guessing Ghostbusters. I'll give you a hint. This movie's cast included an Oscar winner for Best Supporting Actor from the 1992 film City Slickers. Send me your guesses, and the 10th correct listener gets a Right to Reason coffee mug free of charge. I'll even pay shipping. This week, we were scheduled to discuss wokeism with two psychologists, but I thought the recent Texas legislation was kind of pertinent. So next week, we will be educated about the problems of tribalism within woke and far-left culture from two psychologists, Valerie Tirico and Hector Garcia, between now and then. Remember that you have the right to reason.
This was the best of what you get.
Hey friends, this is Seamus, and this is the best podcast.
This is the best of the Right to Reason podcast.
Hey, it's your boy Steve Hill, a.k.a. Satan, and this is the Right to Reason.
The Right to Reason.
This was the best he could do.
I'm Michael Virgilio. I know funny, and the Right to Reason podcast is a joke.
Support our Right to Reason at patreon.com/right.
Not the best podcast, but it's what we got.
This was the Right to Reason podcast.
This podcast sucks.
This is the Right to Reason podcast.